All right, welcome back. It's been a week now since Finance Minister eNCA delivered his mid-term budget, and the Budget Justice Coalition has submitted a comprehensive response and made some recommendations. Now, it says there's an urgent need to confront the high levels of inequality and poverty affecting marginalized communities. It calls for an economic approach that prioritizes the welfare of all South Africans. So joining us for more on this is Matshidiso Lencoasa from the Budget Justice Coalition Steering Committee. And Matshidiso, thank you so much for your time. A very good morning to you. I think first and foremost, what's your reaction to the Minister's budget statement upon hearing it?
Yes, so we were, I would say, disappointed but not surprised, because there had been conversations leading up to the budget on massive budget cuts. So ahead of the budget, there was the announcement by the Ministry of Health that they would be cutting the HIV/AIDS budget by $1 billion. And so we understood, it's a weak economic climate, and we knew, and over the past 10 years, actually, there have been significant budget cuts and erosion of investment in human rights and education and healthcare because of, the high cost of living. But there's still a glimmer of hope, and hoping that government will be able to see fiscal policy and budgets as an opportunity to shield the most marginalized people, but in fact all South Africans, from this very harsh economic climate.
Yeah, and most of the criticism I've found was that interest groups were talking against the austerity measures that they found, of course, within the statement, warning the minister against that. What's your view when it comes to austerity measures?
Yes, so austerity measures recently have been positioned as it's the only way, it's the only way. Unfortunately, the way that we see it, it's not fair that South Africans, especially the most marginalized, the most underserved communities, bear the burden of perhaps poor policy decision-making. We saw it earlier this year when it came to the Eskom budget. So there was an increase in the debt that was taken on by Eskom, and what it meant is that it crowded out investment in education and healthcare. And so it means that people who use nearly 85% of people who use public healthcare have less money invested in it, and that number is growing, the number of people using public healthcare. But we already have an underserved public healthcare system, public resources education system. It already is under-resourced. So the idea of cutting that budget even further is quite concerning. How will we protect the constitutional rights to nutrition, to education, to healthcare for everyone in this country in that context? Right.
You've also had a comprehensive, recommendation that you've tabled. What are some of those recommendations that you've put forward to the Finance Minister?
Yeah. So overall, I think the main recommendation is that we need to foreground human rights when we are making budget decisions, and so human rights impact assessments are crucial. Right. So we know that fiscal policy, there's a lot of trade-offs. It can be quite political, and whether the talk of increasing the debt that we have or increasing taxes, it raises concern, especially in this weak economic climate. And we say, regardless, whichever approach they take, we need to make sure that the human rights are considered, and we need to think, okay, if we are going to increase debt, what impact does that have on education, on healthcare? If we're taking taxes, how do we make sure that it's in the most progressive way? For example, an increase in VAT, yes, it affects all South Africans, but that 15% impacts people. If you have a smaller pool of income, that 15% is a lot bigger, and it feels more significant. And so organizations within the BJC, like the Institute of Economic Justice and the Alternative Information Development Center, have done extensive work on alternatives to increasing the revenue on the revenue side. Instead of just looking at let's budget cut, there are ways to increase our revenues in a way that's more equitable to people in this country. And one area that I found very interesting is that we have a lot of illicit financial flows and a tax-based erosion. So a lot of money that should be taxed is not actually being taxed. We have large multinational corporations who are not paying their share of the tax. And what that means is that small proportion of people in this country who are paying tax, in fact, actually everyone in this country pays tax through VAT, through fuel levies, whatever it is, it just means that the burden is borne more greatly. And so as the BJC, we support the recommendation that that we need to start being more effective and looking at how do we ensure that we don't erode our tax base further.
Absolutely. And I also spoke to a couple of economists that wanted to hear more from, the finance minister regarding economic growth, some of the interventions and measures they're putting in place to grow our economy, as opposed to just cutting back and spending less. Any recommendations, rather, that you make as the BJC with regards to that, how the economy can grow, how the government can invest in economic growth?
Yes, so that's a very interesting question, and I'm sure, having spoken to all the various economists, there are many proposals, many of which we do support as a BJC. One of the most important ways, of course, like in the country that we're facing, there's a lot of youth unemployment in this country. And so what it means is that even, people are struggling, have no choice but to receive funding from the government. And so in order to meaningfully participate in the economy, we need economic participation in order for our GDP to grow. And so unemployment is a big area that needs to be tackled, as well as bolstering our public sector to ensure, there are areas like government jobs, for example, like being a nurse, being a teacher, has provided meaningful employment for many people in this country, including women, in particular black women, which is a conversation when we talk about the public wage bill. We often overlook the gendered impacts of it.
Yeah.
And so that's an area that we could be looking at. And overall, I guess what we're saying is that there are many ways to do it, but regardless of it, we need to be looking not just as what is most politically viable, but also what is in the interest of the people in this country.
Yeah, and the majority of them being marginalized. And thank you so much, Matshidiso. Quite significant points you make and share with me right on Newslink, and I appreciate you coming on to have this conversation with us, Matshidiso, all the way from the Budget Justice Coalition. Just at the back of Finance Minister eNCA Godongwana's medium-term budget statement a week ago. All right, more to come right here on Newslink. We'll be right back after this.